Is Berkly Catton a top 5 talent in the 2024 NHL Draft? An update on a head-to-head between Alexis Lafrenière and Quinton Byfield. And then we'll end things off with another game on the line segment, this time for the 2017 NHL Draft. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi and Sebastian. And on today's episode, we'll be breaking down, first and foremost, an update on Berkly Catton and whether or not we think he's a top 5 talent in the 2024 NHL Draft. Then we'll talk about a head-to-head here between Alexis Lafrenière and Quinton Byfield, two players who haven't necessarily lived up to expectations since their draft year. And we'll kind of look at where they're at right now and what we predict for both of them and who would be the better player at the end of the day in their prime. And then finally, we'll end things off with another game on the line segment where we pick a player from a different round from a specific draft year and try to build a starting 6 with that, 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and goalie to try to win a Game 7 final in the Stanley Cup Finals. But before we get into that, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next here on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's start things off with a personal favorite of mine from the 2024 draft, Berkly Catton. He is a ton of fun. He reminds me in a lot of ways of the way that Zach Benson was viewed in his draft year last year, in terms of an undersized player who just does everything right, who understands the game of hockey very well. They're fundamentally different players, and we'll talk about that in detail and kind of compare them a bit. But the way he's viewed really reminds me of that, mainly because he's rarely in any top 5, but I feel like he very much deserves to be. What's your read on him so far? I mean, I've watched a lot of him at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, but in terms of WHL tape, he's not been the type of player. He's not been the player that I've watched the most out of the CHL. You've watched a bit more of him in that league, so talk me through what you've seen from him in the dub so far.
Yeah, Berkly Catton's a ton of fun. This is a player who stylistically and in terms of feel for the game reminds me a little bit of Zach Benson. Lots of differences in their games too, for sure. Berkly Catton is a very high-end skater, which Zach Benson is not, and is not quite the same level in terms of overall manipulation on the ice and playmaking ability
and defensive impact.
Or defensive impact. That's way out there. It's not close. It's not close at all, really. But Catton is this high motor, elite transition centerman who is going to outwork everyone on the ice. He's going to try a ton of things with the puck. He's a pretty strong handler who's able to execute plays at high speeds. And he's quite middle driven. He loves to buzz around the slot, off puck. Very much an agent of chaos in the offensive zone, which we love a lot. And in transition, he is lights out, and he was as well as a D-1 in the dub. Just so consistently the primary puck carrier, but really deceptive in possession, uses his line mates really effectively to just create openings and to just access the offensive zone, not at all a selfish player with the puck, and constantly uses lateral movement and lane switches and delays to just try to create these openings, and he's really creative in doing that. And these are all great professional habits that I think translate quite easily. So Catton to me is a very, very easy middle 6 projection as a baseline, and then we'll see if the skill can pop to the level of increasing that to a top 6 projection. As of right now, he's kind of in my 6 to 10 range of the draft in my preliminary rankings. I think 5 is pretty close. In terms of likability, he's definitely in the top 5, but in terms of overall projection, I still have to be convinced of the upper tier upside. But this is a very, very skilled player who's a ton of fun to watch, who basically every fan of the game can respect the style of. So, Berkly Catton's really fun.
No, absolutely. I fully agree. The thing is, for me, the way I see it is, in Berkly Catton, you've got a player who has a lethal ability to impact the game at just the right moment. And that is very hard to teach. It's just the pure clutch factor, and we saw a lot of it at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. He was often carrying the team on his back when nothing was happening on any other line. He was outplaying Michael Misa, who, to be fair, is 16 years old, but is an exceptional status prospect who's just playing the lights out in the OHL. And he was outplaying him at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, and was especially outplaying him at key moments in the game. Down a goal in the third, up a goal in the third, he was doing the right things at the right moments. And over time, the puck seemed to follow him everywhere. You look at a player like Berkly Catton, who's got that pedigree and that understanding, that feel for the game, and that's one thing that is extremely difficult to first encapsulate in data, second to encapsulate in terms of what happens on the ice, but third and most importantly, it's very, very difficult to teach. It's hard to give a player that composure, that clutch factor, that understanding of when and how to do things on the ice at specific moments in the game. I feel like Berkly Catton understands that extremely well, at least from the viewings that I've had. To be fair, he's not a defensive player by any means. He can hold his own. He's below average in terms of an NHL projection, but at his current level right now, he can hold his own fair enough. But what you're getting from Berkly Catton is an elite puck transitioner. That's the thing that has stood out for me the most in every viewing I've had of him. Is you get him the puck and he carries that up the ice, and it's getting to the offensive zone and control. And that combined with his ability to then move off puck, find pockets of space, buzz in and out of the slot, and just exploit the tiniest of gaps. I feel like by the end of the year, Berkly Catton is going to be a top 5 lock. I know that right now it doesn't. I know that right now he's in a situation where he's just starting off his draft year, and it's starting off slower than expected, and a lot of the things that he's doing aren't as flashy and standoffish and stand out as I think he's capable of. I think by the time we reach March or April, it's not even going to be a conversation. He's going to improve his game in the ways that matter. He's going to start impacting the game more and more. So I'm fairly confident in what Berkly Catton can become. I just think that as he stands right now, you're right. He's in that 6 to 10 range. It's just a matter of time, though, for me, before he reaches that top 5 slot and just makes it his. I don't think he's going to be in the top 3 conversation by any means, but 4 or 5 is exactly where I kind of predict him to be by the end of the year. But time will tell. He's given me a lot of Zach Benson vibes. So even though they're fundamentally different players, I feel like they both understand the game at a level that just can't be taught. And I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of players who understand the game at a level that exceeds others, not necessarily in terms of what they do on the ice, but when they do it. And they're in that conversation for sure. But let's go a bit more in detail onto that difference here between Zach Benson and Berkly Catton, because obviously the defensive game, Zach Benson is a more impactful player on 200 feet, and it's not even a question about it.
Yeah.
But offensively, I feel like Catton leans more scorer in terms of his mindset than Zach Benson. Zach Benson was the best playmaker in last year's draft, and but
for sure,
they're mentally different players, right?
They are like to me, Berkly Catton's kind of like if you were to mesh Zach Benson and Alex Newhook and put them together, you kind of just get Berkly Catton. Exactly. You get Zach Benson's intensity, engagement, processing speed, composure. But you're getting Alex Newhook's transition ability and the overall skating, the dynamism, the lane switches, the overall offensive style. I think is a little bit more similar to like an Alex Newhook, for instance, than a Zach Benson. But there are definitely parallels to draw between these players, and I'm keeping these comps to just players that came out of BC development wise to keep it a little bit more simple. But Berkly Catton's a ton of fun, and end of the day, he is definitely his own player. Like we were making these very early comparisons just to kind of draw a big scale picture of the style of player that a Catton is. But yeah, I agree. I think that in terms of that Benson comparable, it really is like the way that they approach the game in terms of scanning and taking in their surroundings, being very composed all the time, and being 110% engaged all game long. And that's a combination that you don't see in too many players, and these two definitely have it.
100%. It's so fun to watch on the ice. I mean,
So
every viewing I've logged of Catton is just it makes me giggle. It's that kind of player. So we'll be keeping a close eye on Benson. On Berkly Catton rather,
both.
as of course. But as he develops and kind of rounds out his game in the WHL, is going to be even more interesting to kind of watch develop. And like I said, I'm fairly confident that by the end of the year we're talking about a top 5 player. But right now, there's some ways to go in terms of reaching that conversation. That wraps things up for our first segment. Before we get into our second segment, I want to talk to you about our new sponsor for today's episode. Our sponsor for today's episode is a favorite of mine when it comes to ordering food online. Whether it's groceries or just your favorite delivery spot, DoorDash has you covered. They're really good in terms of their service overall. I use them all the time. I've used a bunch of different services during starting back to the pandemic. I mean, when you can't go out for delivery for groceries and you need to deliver food to your door, I've tried Uber Eats, I've tried Skip the Dishes, and I've tried DoorDash. And DoorDash is the only one I've stuck to. I bought their Dash Pass, which is really useful because you get $0 delivery fees on anything above $15, including groceries. And on top of that, their service is excellent. Anytime you have an issue with your order, anytime the wrong order gets to your door, that kind of stuff, they're quick to act. They get you your refund fairly quickly, and they're really reliable when it comes to the service they offer. Consistent service. Delivery drivers who read your instructions and make sure to leave the order exactly where it needs to be. And when you're missing something for your breakfast or your dinner or anything that you need in terms of your needs in terms of making food throughout the day, they've got you covered. Or if it's just a lazy Sunday and you're looking for some McDonald's on a good day, they're the place to go. So get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to $20 value when you use the code LOCKED. That's LOCKED at checkout. This is a limited time offer. Terms apply, so make sure to check it out quickly. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKED on your first order. Don't forget, that's code LOCKED, LOCKED, for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. All right, so moving on to our second segment, we'll do a head-to-head for Alexis Lafrenière of the New York Rangers and Quinton Byfield of the LA Kings. Now, this is a conversation for two players who haven't reached the heights that we expect from a number 1 and number 2 overall pick in their draft year. They're drafted the same year. Both of them have had difficult trajectories to their seasons so far, and it's difficult to see the path to a proper top 6 or top line NHL role in the future, but I'm fairly more confident in one than the other. Let's start with Alexis Lafrenière. Lafrenière happens to be from the same hometown that I'm from, Saint-Eustache in Quebec, and he was a player that I watched very early. I was 14 years old when I went to the rink for the first time in Saint-Eustache and watched one of his games, and he didn't stand out at all. He was just another player. I mean, I knew his name because I went to high school with his sister, but I didn't know anything. He didn't stand out to me in any way that made me think, okay, wow, this is an NHLer in the making. He was fairly average up until he hit 16 years old. He had a growth spurt. He gained some weight in the right places, and he improved a lot of the areas in his game that needed to improve. I mean, he suddenly became a player who can outspeed a lot of opponents, can outwork them, can outfight them, can outmuscle them, and can outskill them as well. I mean, he was able to do some great plays in transition, move the puck from the boards to the middle fairly well, and it's really when he started to reach 16 years old that his game kind of took off, and he became the prospective number 1 overall pick and runaway number 1 overall pick at one point in the season in his draft year. But since then, it's been a bit of a struggle, and I think I know why. It's that growth spurt that I mentioned. Some players play a certain way until they reach a certain size, and then their game has to mold and change in order to adapt to that. But they adapt at a level that they shouldn't be adapting to. So a player who hits a growth spurt at 16, for example, is going to play a different way starting at 16 against a competition that he should actually still be playing the exact same way against, because he's developing competitive advantages that'll disappear the moment he reaches pro level. So once he got to the NHL and was kind of shoehorned into a middle 6 role for the New York Rangers from off the bat in his draft year, you saw a player who was trying to play to strengths that don't work as well at the NHL level. He was trying to outmuscle opponents that were the same strength as his. He was trying to get under opponents' hands when he was having trouble to do so because of his larger frame. He wasn't angling his body fairly well enough in order to win board battles, but especially you saw an Alexis Lafrenière who was trying to adapt to his teammates, not the other way around. He wasn't making his teammates adapt to him and his play style, and he wasn't dictating what happened on the ice. He was adapting his game and the way he plays to the teammates he was with and the situation he was put in. What do you think that does to a player when they develop? How does that manifest itself, for example, in a player like Alexis Lafrenière in terms of the impact on the ice, rather than just the more scouting side where you're looking at what they do on the ice?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely plays a big role in how they develop, right? In terms of like that stylistic match. And I think one big thing with Lafrenière too is that because he progressed physically so early on, like this was a big, strong, physical 16-year-old when he started like lighting up the QMJHL, and he never really had to learn other ways of solving problems other than just outmuscling, outworking, outskilling everyone around him, which just, as you said, can't fly at the NHL level. And he's really, really intelligent with the puck on his stick, but he doesn't necessarily have the same tool belt that other players of his caliber do, that they've had to develop because they didn't have the same advantages growing up that Lafrenière did. So, for instance, like right now, we're still looking at Lafrenière and his skating. Like the speed element just still hasn't fully kicked in at the NHL level yet. He's still a sub-average NHL skater, which was quite clearly the main thing he had to work on after he was drafted, and it just still hasn't happened. Like, I think when you're a player of that caliber and you're so good against your own age group, there's definitely some players that then suffer from not really being able to adapt later on when they realize that they need more tools than they thought they did, and that most people thought they did. Like, I don't think anyone really expected Lafrenière to develop in the way that he has in New York. I mean, the power play production has been painful, like very, very little on the power play with the man advantage, which obviously has limited his opportunities because that's usually where you see high-end young players make their mark, is on the power play, and that's how they earn bigger even strength roles. And it just hasn't happened with Lafrenière. Whereas if you're looking at a player like Quinton Byfield, who was so much more raw and so much younger for his draft class too when he was drafted, the development is completely different. And yeah, sure, it's been slower, but the expectation was for him to take time. Like everyone knew in his draft, you're like, yeah, the tools here are insane. We still need to find a way to translate this to the NHL, but there has to be a way of making him an impactful player. With Lafrenière, it was like, oh, you draft him and you just plug him into your top six and you're set for ages, which didn't end up being the case.
Yeah.
Whereas with Byfield, there's always this approach of needing to mold, right? And constantly adjusting the development. And I think that's done him a lot of good. We saw him tear up the AHL in like 16 games last season, where he was at like over a point a game and scored like 9 goals or something, like producing a fair amount. And in the NHL, there have been so many nice little flashes where I've seen Byfield take over shifts in a way that I've not seen from Lafrenière at any point in his career so far as a professional. And while the production still hasn't fully kicked in with Byfield yet, my bet is that it happens this season. I think he's going to take a big step. I'm still a firm believer in Quinton Byfield. I think he's going to be a very, very, very good top 6 centerman. Whether that's on a first or a second line, we'll see with time. But they have Pierre Dubois now as well, so there's less pressure of him for Byfield to kind of like make that number 1 role his own, especially with Kopitar still in the lineup too. So I'm very curious to see how Byfield develops, but I do think that the fact that he was so raw in his draft year has actually benefited his development, because the focus has always been on molding his toolkit into something that translates, rather than just plugging him in and just giving him minutes rather blindly, which is kind of the Rangers approach with Lafrenière.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree. And I went on the LA Kings Locked On NHL podcast, and one of the things I said is by the time he's 24, Quinton Byfield's going to be a first liner. I stand by that. I still think that that's a fair possibility and a likely one as well, given the way that he plays and the things that he does. For me, he does need to improve his skating. There's a hunched over element to Byfield's skating, which basically his chest is parallel to the ice, and I don't like that much.
Yeah.
But I've seen some work on that. He's become a bit more upright. I'm just hoping that continues to develop, because if he does learn to skate at an NHL level with an NHL level agility and balance at his size, oh my goodness, that's going to be very fun. But yeah, that wraps things up for our second segment, where we talk about Byfield and Lafrenière head-to-head. I think we both agree Byfield is more likely to be a better player than Lafrenière at this point. We're going to head into our third segment, where we do our Game on the Line segment for the 2017 NHL Draft, right after these messages from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, so moving on to our final segment here as we do our Game on the Line segment for the 2017 NHL Draft. This is a fairly interesting one. I think this one was a lot more straightforward than the last one. I believe we have 3, maybe 4 players that are exactly the same. Yeah, so it's we both had the same idea heading into this, and it's a very simple exercise here, because there was a clear better player pretty much at every position. But we have 2 very slight differences in our lineup, so let's get right into it here. My starting 3 in terms of forwards, I started with Morgan Barron at center. There aren't many very good options outside of the first round for centers, and the first round pick is very, very obvious. We'll talk about that in a sec. But Morgan Barron is my center. I went with 2 fantastic options here at left wing for the Dallas Stars in the second round. None other than Jason Robertson,
Who?
Mr. Hockey. Yeah, exactly.
Little obscure player there.
Exactly. The player who everyone thought was too slow to ever play in the NHL, but ended up outthinking everyone at every single level. So
Shocker.
he's become a fantastic player, an above point per game player, one of the most impactful players on 200 feet in the NHL. So he's a very, very easy option there in the second round at left wing. And I went in the at right wing with Drake Batherson. I always mix them up with Jake Sanderson. They got very similar names, but Drake Batherson at right wing. You took the same player as well. We have the same wingers basically. Drake Batherson was picked in the 5th round, I believe. 4th round. Drake Batherson is a fairly composed player. He's got really good speed. A fantastic shooter. Scored a decent amount of goals so far in his campaign. And I feel like he complements Jason Robertson, who thinks the game with a bit more of a chess-like element to his game, whereas Batterson's a bit more run and gun, and Morgan Barron combines that with his two-way game, his ability to get back defensively, to make plays offensively. He's a very very mature player in terms of his overall game, even though he was just drafted 5 drafts ago. Great player, but I'm a bit more confident in your center there.
Oh, so am I. I mean,
yeah.
I went with Noah Cates, who was a 5th round pick of the Philadelphia Flyers, who isn't necessarily a slam dunk center. He plays a bit wing, a bit of center, but he does play enough center for him to fit in this category. And as you said, I also went with a 2-way player here. Like Noah Cates is he was a real standout last season as an NHL rookie on the defensive side of the game. Offensively, there were some nice flashes. I thought that he was a decent playmaker, makes space for his teammates, is very good supporter of play, which is all that you really need when you already have Robertson and Batherson as the wingers. But he's going to bring in a lot of that defensive work rate and those defensive habits at 200 feet, the entire length of the ice. And I wanted that to kind of just give more freedom for Robertson and Batherson to just kind of do their thing offensively. And I think that Noah Cates is a really nice fit to complete that forward line here.
100%. Moving on to the defense pairs, I like mine a bit more, mainly because I've got a lefty at left and a right D on the right. But when you've got Cale Makar at right D, I don't think it really matters who's on this D pair. I
can put myself in there, and it would be relatively okay. Which is not a good thing.
You could put a pylon in front of the net, and that'll be basically all you need. A literal pylon. But I mean, you're looking for me. I'd rather have Sebastian Aho on the left side, just mainly because his game is so simple that all he'll really do is just pass the puck to Cale Makar, and Makar will do the rest. And then Aho will be there for the rare times that Cale Makar gets caught below the goal line, because that happens sometimes. And Aho will be there to defend the rush really, really well. That's one thing he does extremely well. And I feel like that is the main threat with your line, is that we're looking at a a rushing team. And if you have Sebastian Aho on the defensive side defending those rushes, I'm a bit more confident in that than having Nick Perbix, who's a bit less mobile, but a lot more rangy. I value mobility in the way that this team is built. So I'm more confident in my D pair and how it would work in practice on the ice, because the amount of freedom that allows Cale Makar, the amount of just, you're basically just unchaining the dog on a bone that he is in the offensive zone and just letting him just run wild. And Aho will be there for the occasional bad bounce or offensive rush that comes the other way. But the amount of damage that Cale Makar can do on the ice is just, it doesn't really matter, does it? But at the end of the day, Nick Perbix is a great option. I mean, a great,
I'm quite happy with him here, actually. Like he was a 6th round draft pick for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and yes, he plays a very straightforward game. He's not gonna wow you with his mobility or with his creativity, but that's not what I needed here. I wanted a player who I can fall back on defensively to just mop things up when things get messy, because as much fun as a lineup with Cale Makar, Jason Robertson, and Drake Batherson is, there's going to be instances where things fall apart. And I think that Nick Perbix is a decent enough defensive defenseman. I really like what I saw of him with the Lightning last season in the NHL, which was kind of his breakout campaign. And while he is a right shot playing on my left side, for me, I think that maybe, yes, Sebastian Aho is a slight upgrade on him. It just, for me, was not worth dropping Noah Cates for that thing. I was not worried about my defensive pairing at all to begin with. I wanted to have a centerman that I really, really trusted, and Morgan Barron, it wouldn't have been that for me. Whereas with Noah Cates up front, who's also such a high-end defensive player, I'm quite happy having Nick Perbix as kind of my stay-at-home defenseman who has a very, very straightforward job of just minimizing high-danger opportunities on the ice, and that's kind of all he has to do. So I'm quite happy with that. And then in net, I've got Stuart Skinner, who I think you have as well. There were a couple options for goaltending in this draft class. For instance, Jeremy Swayman was a 4th round option, but that would have then meant dropping Drake Batherson, which I don't think either of us really wanted to do.
It was basically all there was really in the 5th round, in the 4th round that was worth keeping. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But no, so I think with Stuart Skinner in goal, we both went with someone who's very mobile, quite aggressive in net, and should complement the style of the actual lineup quite nicely. I think I think he's a really nice final cog in here, and as a whole, this is one of the better lineups I think we've been able to compile so far in this series.
100%. And hindsight is 2020, eh? I mean, that's what happens when you've got 5 seasons to make your decision. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, by the way, I forgot to mention this, but Sebastian Aho is not the Carolina Hurricanes Sebastian Aho. He's the New York Islanders Sebastian Aho.
Yeah, key note there. We are not sticking Sebastian Aho of the Carolina Hurricanes at left shot defenseman.
That would not work. As good as he is defensively. But yeah, I mean, I at the end of the day, I feel like if we're just setting aside the 4 players we have that are the exact same, if we're looking at Noah Cates and Nick Perbix versus Morgan Barron and Sebastian Aho, I prefer Noah Cates and Nick Perbix, if I'm perfectly honest. And that's just based on the value. I think that Cates is a bigger upgrade on Barron than Aho is on Perbix, even though I prefer Aho.
This is my thinking. Yeah, like, exactly. I definitely eyed Aho as well, but when I saw that it was him or Cates, I was like, yeah, I gotta go with my center here.
Fully agree. But that wraps things up for our final segment in today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave your comments letting us know what you want us to talk about next and who you think would win between these 2 lineups. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your updates about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episode here as we break down the preseason game of the Montreal Canadiens, the first one of the season. Now, this has been Hadi with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.